What happens when an entire galactic alliance discovers that everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong? When species that have mastered stellar navigation and quantum physics realize they've been mocking the very beings who could reshape the balance of power across the cosmos. The Zephyrian Empire ruled 1,000 worlds. The Crystalline Consortium controlled trade routes spanning light years. The Hive Collective commanded fleets that blotted out stars. Together, they formed the Galactic Triumvirate, the three most powerful civilizations in known space. And they all agreed on one thing: humans were a joke. Terrible aim. They would laugh at intergalactic conferences. Can barely hit their own moon consistently. The jest became so common that human accuracy entered galactic slang as a synonym for spectacular failure. But jokes have a way of becoming dangerous when the punchline fights back. This is the story of how humanity went from the galaxy's favorite comedy act to its most feared force. How a species dismissed as clumsy and imprecise delivered a strike so perfect, so calculated, that three mighty empires froze in terrified awe. The universe was about to learn that when humans miss their target, it's because they were aiming at something else entirely. And when they finally revealed what they'd been aiming for all along, no one was laughing anymore. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stepped into the Hall of Galactic Heritage on Station Nexus Prime, her human delegation trailing behind her like ducklings following their mother. The massive chamber stretched before them, its crystalline walls pulsing with soft bioluminescent patterns that had taken the Zephyrians 3 centuries to perfect. Floating display cases hovered at eye level, each containing artifacts from the greatest achievements of the triumvirate civilizations. Every human diplomat had to endure the tour at least once. It was part of the initiation process, a subtle reminder of humanity's place in the cosmic hierarchy. She watched as her junior staff members, fresh from Earth's diplomatic academy, gazed in genuine wonder at the technological marvels surrounding them. Magnificent, isn't it? The voice belonged to Counselor Jex High, a towering Zephyrian whose iridescent scales shifted from deep purple to silver as he spoke. His forearms moved in flowing gestures, a sign of either genuine pleasure or barely contained amusement. With Zephyrians, it was often hard to tell the difference. Indeed, Elena replied, her tone diplomatically neutral. She had learned long ago that showing too much enthusiasm only encouraged what came next. Zechzai glided toward a display case that Elena knew all too well. Inside, suspended in a stasis field, hung a chunk of twisted metal and ceramic. The placard beneath it read, Human Lunar Landing Attempt Number 847, Mission Designation Eagle's Pride. Notable for missing intended landing zone by 340 kilometers. One of my personal favorites, Zechzai said, his scales now definitely shifting toward the silver of Zephyrian amusement. Your species' persistence in the face of such challenges is truly admirable. Elena's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her diplomatic smile. Behind her, she could hear one of her junior diplomats, Thomas Chen, take a sharp breath. Poor kid probably thought this was just an unfortunate misunderstanding. He'd learn. They moved to the next display. This one contained the remains of what had once been humanity's first attempt at an interstellar probe. The Crystalline Consortium had donated this particular piece to the museum after human engineers had somehow managed to send it careening into a consortium mining station instead of the intended star system. Now this chimed in resonance of Prophet, the consortium's lead trade negotiator, her crystalline form chiming like wind bells as she spoke. This represents perhaps the most expensive targeting error in recorded history. The repairs to mining platform Theta 7 cost nearly 1 trillion standard credits. Elena had heard this story 100 times before, but she noticed how her staff reacted. Some looked embarrassed, others angry, a few seemed to be fighting back laughter at the absurdity of it all. Good. They needed to see this to understand what humanity was up against. The tour continued through the Hall of Human Attempts, as it was informally known among the triumvirate species. There was the debris from humanity's first military engagement with pirates, where human fighters had managed to accidentally target each other more often than the enemy. There was a section dedicated to human terraforming efforts, featuring before and after holographs of 3 different planets, where human atmospheric processes had somehow made the environments worse rather than better. And here, announced Collective Node Prime 7, speaking through its biological interface unit, we have preserved the communication logs from humanity's first contact with our species. The Hive Collective representative activated a holographic display showing a human diplomat attempting to navigate the complex ritual greeting required for formal collective communication. The human in the recording stumbled through the ceremonial phrases, accidentally insulting the collective's queen mothers 3 separate times in the span of 2 minutes. Elena remembered that diplomat. Ambassador Rodriguez, dead now for 50 years. He had been a good man. Brilliant, actually. But the linguistic complexity of collective protocols had defeated him utterly. Of course, the museum display didn't mention that Rodriguez had also been instrumental in establishing the first human collective trade agreements, or that his supposedly fumbling attempts at communication had actually revealed critical flaws in the collective's translation matrices. But those details weren't part of the narrative the triumvirate preferred to tell. "Your species certainly provides excellent educational value," Serge observed as they reached the end of the hall. "It's quite remarkable how you've managed to maintain such optimism despite such a consistent record of missing your intended targets." Elena's smile never wavered, but Thomas Chen stepped forward, his youthful idealism finally overcoming diplomatic protocol. "With respect, Counselor, some of those failures led to unexpected discoveries. The probe that hit your mining station actually detected previously unknown mineral deposits worth far more than the repair costs." The 3 alien representatives exchanged glances, or the closest equivalent their species could manage. The Zephyrian scales rippled with darker colors, the consortium delegates' crystalline form resonated at a slightly higher frequency, and the collective's bio-interface unit tilted its head in a distinctly predatory manner. "How charmingly human," Resonance of Prophet chimed. "Always trying to reframe failure as hidden success. Perhaps that's why your accuracy rates remain so entertainingly low." Elena placed a gentle but firm hand on Thomas's shoulder before he could respond. The young diplomat was learning an important lesson about how the galaxy viewed humanity. But there was no need for him to make it worse with an outburst. "We appreciate the tour," Elena said smoothly, "and we look forward to tomorrow's Defense Committee meeting." "Ah yes." Zekhai's scales shifted back toward purple, a sign of returning formality. "The military preparedness discussions. I trust humanity will be contributing its usual, unique perspective on targeting and strategic planning." The words were carefully chosen to sound respectful while carrying an unmistakable undertone of mockery. Elena had been subjected to this treatment for 15 years of diplomatic service, watching as humanity was gradually marginalized in galactic affairs, relegated to providing raw materials and serving as a cautionary tale about the importance of precision in space operations. But Elena also knew something that the triumvirate representatives did not. Something that would have changed their entire attitude if they had been capable of understanding it. The humans weren't missing their targets. They were aiming at something completely different. As the delegation left the Hall of Galactic Heritage, Elena allowed herself a small, genuine smile. Tomorrow's Defense Committee meeting would be interesting indeed. She had spent the last 5 years carefully positioning herself for this moment, accepting every slight, every condescending comment, every casual dismissal of human capabilities. The triumvirate thought they were so clever, displaying humanity's failures like trophies. What they didn't understand was that each of those failures had taught humanity something valuable about their capabilities, their weaknesses, their true intentions. That night, in her private quarters aboard the station, Elena activated a secure communication channel to Earth. The transmission would take several hours to reach home, but the message was simple and had been predetermined years ago. "The gallery tour is complete," she said to the recording device. "All specimens catalogued and analyzed. Ready to proceed with the art exhibition." To anyone intercepting the transmission, it would sound like harmless diplomatic small talk. The triumvirate's intelligence services had long ago decided that human codes were as clumsy and ineffective as human aim, barely worth monitoring, which was exactly what humanity had been counting on. Back on Earth, in a facility buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, a man in a simple grey uniform received Elena's message and smiled. Admiral Marcus Webb had been waiting for this moment for 23 years, ever since a much younger version of himself had stood in that same hall and listened to alien dignitaries mock his species' military capabilities. "Begin final preparations for Operation Looking Glass," he said to his assembled staff. "And remind our people that tomorrow, the galaxy learns what humans have really been aiming at all this time." The room filled with quiet activity as humans who had spent decades being underestimated prepared to reveal the truth. They weren't the galaxy's comic relief. They were something far more dangerous. They were the galaxy's most patient hunters, and their prey had finally walked into the perfect position. The Triumvirate Defense Committee convened in the morning with all the pomp and ceremony befitting the galaxy's premier military alliance. The chamber itself was a marvel of cooperative engineering, featuring environmental controls that simultaneously accommodated the atmospheric needs of all member species. Crystalline formations jutted from the walls to provide optimal resonance for consortium communication, while bio-neural networks pulsed gently overhead to maintain the collective's connection to their hive minds. The central space was filled with the charged atmosphere that Zephyrins preferred for important deliberations. Elena entered with her reduced delegation, just herself and Thomas Chen this time. The other human diplomatic staff had been given various administrative tasks to keep them busy and away from what was about to unfold. Thomas still seemed shaken by the previous day's museum tour, but Elena had seen something in his eyes that gave her hope for humanity's future diplomatic corps. Anger could be useful if properly channeled. "Welcome, representatives of humanity," boomed Supreme Military Coordinator Vextus, his forearms spread in a gesture that might have been welcoming if not for the predatory gleam in his primary eyes. "We trust you've had time to review the current threat assessment regarding the Void Hunters." The Void Hunters were a nomadic species that had been raiding Outer Rim territories for the past 18 months, hitting supply convoys and isolated settlements before vanishing back into the dark spaces between star systems. They were primitive by Triumvirate standards, using crude weapons and basic faster-than-light drives, but their hit-and-run tactics had proven surprisingly effective against conventional military responses.
"Indeed, Coordinator," Elena replied.
"Earth stands ready to contribute to the defense efforts in whatever capacity you deem appropriate." The pause before that last word was deliberate, and Elena was pleased to see it register with the alien representatives. Good. Let them think humanity was bitter about their limited role in galactic defense. Let them believe humans were desperate to prove themselves. "Excellent," chimed Military Resonance Prime from the consortium. "We have identified several rear area logistics positions where human forces could provide valuable support. Transport convoy escorts, supply depot security, that sort of thing." Elena almost smiled at the transparent dismissal. The Triumvirate had never allowed human military forces anywhere near actual combat operations. Humanity's role in galactic defense consisted entirely of hauling supplies and guarding empty warehouses, while the real fighting was handled by properly trained alien forces. "We appreciate the opportunity to serve," Elena said, and she meant it more than they could possibly understand. "Now then," Vextus continued, his scales shifting to the deep blue of serious military discussion, "let us review the latest intelligence on Void Hunter movements. Collective, Node Military Analysis Prime, please proceed with your briefing." The Collective's military representative interfaced directly with the Chamber's holographic systems, filling the air above the conference table with a three-dimensional map of local space. Red indicators marked known Void Hunter attack sites, while blue zones showed current Triumvirate fleet positions. Analysis indicates the Void Hunters are following a predictable pattern, the bio-interface unit reported in the Collective's characteristic multitonal voice. "They strike at isolated targets, avoid direct confrontation with our main battle groups, and retreat to these sectors." Several areas on the map glowed with amber highlighting. "Our long-range sensor networks have identified multiple possible hiding locations within these zones." Elena studied the tactical display with genuine interest. The Void Hunter strategy was actually quite clever, taking advantage of the Triumvirate's reliance on massive, heavily armed fleet formations. The aliens had built their military doctrine around overwhelming firepower and technological superiority, but they struggled against enemies who refused to engage in traditional battle. "Our response strategy is straightforward," Vextus announced. "We mass our forces here, here, and here." New blue indicators appeared on the map, showing proposed fleet positions. "When the Void Hunters emerge for their next raid, we'll have them surrounded. A simple matter of cutting off their escape routes and bringing superior firepower to bear." Thomas leaned forward slightly, and Elena could see the young diplomat struggling with something. Finally, he spoke up. "Excuse me, Coordinator, but what if they simply avoid those areas entirely? Their raids seem opportunistic rather than strategic. If they see your fleet concentrations, won't they just find softer targets elsewhere?" The chamber fell silent for a moment. Elena watched as the three alien representatives processed this question, their equivalent of facial expressions shifting through various stages of surprise, consideration, and dismissal. "Young human?" Military Resonance Prime finally chimed, her crystalline form resonating with patronizing overtones. "You underestimate the sophistication of our sensor networks. The Void Hunters cannot simply avoid our detection. We know where they are. But do you know where they're going? Thomas pressed, and Elena felt a surge of pride in her junior colleague. Your strategy assumes they'll continue following their current pattern, but what if they adapt? What if they change their approach? Collective Node Military Analysis Prime tilted its bio-interface head in a gesture Elena had learned to recognize as the collective equivalent of condescension. Human military thinking often focuses on such creative interpretations of enemy behavior. This is perhaps why human strike accuracy remains so notably poor. Successful military operations require precision and predictability, not speculation about adaptive enemy responses. Elena saw Thomas's jaw tighten, and she decided it was time to intervene. Not to protect him, but to guide the conversation where she needed it to go. Thomas raises an interesting point, she said calmly. But I think our triumvirate colleagues are correct about the importance of precision. After all, accuracy has always been humanity's greatest challenge in military operations. She stood and activated her personal datapad, projecting her own holographic display alongside the collective's tactical map. This one showed historical data on human military actions, the same information that had been on display in the previous day's museum tour. As you can see, human forces have indeed struggled with targeting accuracy throughout our brief galactic military history. Our success rate in hitting intended targets hovers around 12%, well below galactic standards. The alien representatives made various sounds and gestures of agreement. This was, after all, common knowledge throughout triumvirate space. However, Elena continued, her voice taking on a slightly different tone, I wonder if you might humor a simple human question about military philosophy. Of course, Vexthus replied, his scales now showing the silver of barely contained amusement. When evaluating the success of a military operation, how do you define the target? The question seemed absurdly simple, and Elena could see the aliens exchanging glances that clearly communicated their shared opinion of human intellectual capabilities. The target, Military Resonance Prime explained with exaggerated patience, is the objective designated by military planners. Enemy ships, installations, strategic resources. Basic military doctrine, really. I see. Elena nodded thoughtfully. So if a mission is planned to destroy an enemy ship, and that ship is destroyed, the operation would be considered successful? Naturally, collective node military analysis, Prime confirmed. But what if the destruction of that ship was not the actual goal? What if the real objective was something entirely different, something that was accomplished by appearing to miss the intended target? The chamber fell quiet again, but this time the silence felt different. Elena could sense the subtle shift in attention as the alien representatives began to consider the implications of her question. Are you suggesting, Vexthus said slowly, his scales darkening toward the deep purple of serious consideration, that human military failures were somehow intentional? Elena smiled, and this time she didn't bother to hide the sharp edge in her expression. I'm suggesting that perhaps the triumvirate has been tracking the wrong targets all along. While you've been cataloging our failures to hit enemy ship A or military base B, you've never asked what we might have been aiming for instead. She activated another display, this one showing star charts and shipping routes. Red markers appeared throughout triumvirate space, dozens of them, marking locations where human military operations had supposedly failed over the past 50 years. Every human failure you've documented occurred at a specific location, at a specific time, with specific results. We missed our targets, yes. But what if the real targets were never the ones listed in our mission reports? Thomas was staring at the display with growing understanding, his earlier frustration replaced by something approaching awe. The alien representatives, however, were beginning to look distinctly uncomfortable. You're suggesting some form of deception, Vexthus said, his voice carrying a warning tone. I'm suggesting that humanity has learned the value of patience, Elena replied, and the importance of making your enemies underestimate you while you gather the intelligence you need for the shot that really matters. She activated one final display, this one showing the current positions of Void Hunter forces based on the collective's own intelligence reports. Then she overlaid the historical data from human operations, and the pattern became unmistakable. Every failed human military operation over the past 5 decades had taken place at locations that were now confirmed to be along major Void Hunter supply routes. Every accidental detonation had occurred at sites that were now known to contain Void Hunter staging areas. Every misdirected human probe had somehow managed to map previously unknown regions of space that were now recognized as key strategic positions. 50 years. Elena said quietly. 50 years of your species mocking human accuracy while we systematically mapped every hidden base, every secret route, every strategic vulnerability of a threat you didn't even know existed yet. The alien representative stared at the display in stunned silence. The implications were staggering. If Elena was telling the truth, it meant that humanity had been conducting the longest intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, using their reputation for incompetence as perfect cover for activities that would have triggered massive military responses if detected. "That's impossible," Military Resonance Prime chimed. But her crystalline form was resonating with uncertainty rather than conviction. The Void Hunters only emerged 18 months ago. No one could have predicted their existence decades in advance. Elena's smile grew wider, and now it carried the expression of a predator, revealing its fangs. "Who said anything about prediction? What if I told you that the Void Hunters aren't some recent emergence at all? What if they've been active in these regions for over a century, carefully avoiding contact with triumvirate forces while building their strength?" She paused to let that sink in, watching as the three alien representatives began to truly grasp the scope of what she was suggesting. "And what if I told you that Earth has been aware of their presence for the past 60 years, quietly studying their capabilities and preparing for the day when they would finally reveal themselves to the galaxy?" The chamber was now completely silent except for the soft humming of environmental systems. Elena could practically see the thoughts racing through her audience's minds as they recalculated everything they thought they knew about human military capabilities. "Tomorrow," Elena concluded, "humanity will demonstrate what we've really been aiming at all this time. And I think you'll find our accuracy has improved considerably." Admiral Marcus Webb stood on the bridge of the UES Hawking, humanity's newest and most advanced starship, watching the tactical displays with the satisfaction of a chess player who had spent decades positioning pieces for a single, decisive move. Around him, human naval officers worked with quiet efficiency, their movements betraying none of the nervous energy that typically preceded major military operations. They had been preparing for this moment for over 20 years. "Admiral," called Commander Sarah Park from the communication station, "we're receiving priority transmissions from Station Nexus Prime."
The Triumvirate Defense Committee is requesting immediate clarification of our previous intelligence claims.
Webb smiled grimly. Elena had done her job perfectly, dropping just enough hints to panic the alien leadership without revealing the full scope of human preparations. By now, the three triumvirate species were frantically reviewing 50 years of supposedly failed human military operations, looking for patterns they had never bothered to notice before. "Any word from Ambassador Vasquez?" he asked. "She's requesting permission to brief the committee on historical context," Park replied. "Apparently, they're having some difficulty accepting the implications of our intelligence data." "I imagine they are," Webb mused. "Very well. Inform the ambassador she has authorization to proceed with Protocol 7. Across the bridge, heads turned at the mention of Protocol 7. It was the designation for full intelligence disclosure, something that had never been authorized in the 60-year history of human galactic diplomacy. Even the ship's veteran officers, who had been briefed on aspects of Operation Looking Glass, seemed surprised by the scope of what they were about to reveal. Webb understood their reaction. The operation they were about to execute would fundamentally change humanity's relationship with the galaxy. There would be no going back to the days when humans could hide behind a reputation for incompetence and clumsiness. "Sir," called Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez from the sensor station, "we're detecting massive fleet movements throughout Triumvirate space. It looks like they're repositioning their forces based on our intelligence briefing." "As expected," Webb replied. "How are our friends responding?" Rodriguez's display showed a real-time tactical map of the local sector, with color-coded indicators showing the movement of different military forces. Blue markers represented triumvirate fleets, currently racing toward the positions Elena had identified as key Void Hunter staging areas. Red markers showed the Void Hunter forces themselves, scattered across a dozen hidden bases and mobile fleet elements. And green markers showed human forces, positioned with mathematical precision throughout the region in patterns that would have seemed random to outside observers. "The Void Hunters are beginning to react to the triumvirate fleet movements," Rodriguez reported. "Multiple groups are breaking from their established positions. It looks like they're preparing for coordinated action," Webb nodded. The Void Hunters weren't primitive raiders, as the Triumvirate believed. They were a sophisticated military force that had been playing an elaborate game of cat and mouse with galactic civilization for over a century. Their apparent primitiveness was as carefully calculated as humanity's apparent incompetence. "Admiral," came a new voice from the communication station. "We're receiving a priority transmission on the old diplomatic frequency. It's from Void Hunter Command. The bridge fell silent. Even after years of secret contact, hearing from their unlikely allies still had the power to focus everyone's attention. "Put it through," Webb ordered. The main display shimmered and resolved into an image that would have terrified most galactic citizens. The Void Hunter commander was a massive, insectoid creature, with multiple arms and compound eyes that reflected light like faceted gems. When it spoke, the translation matrix rendered its chittering vocalizations into crisp, professional English. "Admiral Webb," the alien commander said, "we are ready to proceed with the final phase. Our forces are moving to establish positions. The triumvirate fleets are reacting exactly as your psychological profiles predicted." "Confirmed, Commander Sec-10," Webb replied. "All human elements are in position. We can begin the demonstration whenever you're ready." "The demonstration will commence in 37 minutes, Sec-10 responded. "We trust your diplomats are prepared to manage the political aftermath." Webb allowed himself a small smile. "Ambassador Vasquez has the situation well in hand. The triumvirate will be in a very receptive mood for new information by the time we're finished." The transmission ended, and Webb turned to address his bridge crew. These were some of humanity's finest military minds, but even they didn't know the full scope of what they were about to witness. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today marks the end of humanity's longest intelligence operation. For 62 years, we have maintained secret contact with the Void Hunters while allowing the triumvirate to believe we were simply incompetent military operators. Today, that deception ends." He activated the ship's internal communication system, addressing not just the bridge crew, but every human on every ship in their scattered fleet. "What you are about to see will change the balance of power in this galaxy. The triumvirate has ruled through technological superiority and overwhelming force for 5 centuries. They have grown complacent, assuming that their way of warfare is the only effective approach. Today, they learn what humans and Void Hunters have discovered through decades of cooperation: that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is the enemy's own assumptions. The tactical display updated, showing new data as human sensors, far more sophisticated than anything the triumvirate possessed, tracked the movement of forces throughout the region. The picture that emerged was staggering in its complexity. The triumvirate fleets, thinking they were executing a brilliant strategic encirclement, were actually walking into a trap 60 years in the making. The Void Hunter forces they were pursuing weren't retreating or hiding. They were moving to predetermined positions, ready to demonstrate military capabilities that the galactic powers had never suspected. And humanity was positioned to observe, record, and control every aspect of what was about to unfold. "Admiral," Commander Park called out, "we're receiving an emergency transmission from Nexus Prime. The Defense Committee is requesting an immediate audience with Ambassador Vasquez." "I'll bet they are," Webb replied. "Put the ambassador through to us as well. I think it's time she explained a few more things to our triumvirate friends." The display split, showing Elena in the familiar environment of the Defense Committee chamber on one side and the tactical overview of fleet movements on the other. Webb could see the alien representatives in the background, their body language displaying various forms of agitation and concern. "Admiral," Elena's voice came through clearly, "the committee has some questions about our historical intelligence operations." "I imagine they do," Webb replied. "Are they ready for a full briefing?" Elena glanced back at the alien representatives, then nodded. "They're very eager to understand how we've been gathering intelligence on an enemy they didn't know existed. Then by all means, let's enlighten them." Webb activated a new set of displays, sharing his screens with the Defense Committee chamber. The aliens found themselves looking at 60 years of meticulously documented intelligence data, showing every aspect of Void Hunter society, technology, and military capability. The first images showed early contact protocols, documenting humanity's first encounters with Void Hunter scouts in the Outer Rim territories. The Void Hunters hadn't been raiding human settlements. They had been studying them, just as humans had been studying the rest of galactic civilization. Initial contact occurred in 2387, Webb narrated, when a human exploration vessel encountered a Void Hunter research ship in what is now designated the Kepler Neutral Zone. Instead of attacking, both sides initiated communication protocols. The next series of images showed the development of human Void Hunter cooperation over the following decades. Joint technological development projects, shared intelligence operations, coordinated military exercises conducted in secret while the triumvirate remained oblivious to both species' true capabilities. The Void Hunters have been observers of galactic civilization for over 3 centuries, Webb continued. They developed their nomadic lifestyle specifically to study other species without triggering defensive responses. They were particularly interested in understanding how the Triumvirate maintained political and military control over such a vast region of space. Supreme Military Coordinator Vex Thysis finally found his voice. "You're saying that humans and Void Hunters have been allied for 60 years? Not allied exactly," Elena interjected. "More like research partners. We shared a common interest in understanding how galactic power structures actually function. And the raids?" Military Resonance Prime chimed with overtones of confusion. "The attacks on our shipping and settlements?" Webb smiled grimly. "Carefully staged demonstrations designed to provoke exactly the response you've been planning. The Void Hunters needed to observe Triumvirate military doctrine under combat conditions. The attacks were real enough, but the targets were selected to minimize actual casualties while providing maximum intelligence value. The tactical display updated again, showing the current positions of all military forces in the region. The pattern was now unmistakable. Triumvirate fleets were positioned exactly where human and Void Hunter strategists had predicted they would be, based on 60 years of psychological and military analysis. "You've been studying us," Collective Node Military Analysis Prime said, its biointerface unit displaying what Webb recognized as the collective equivalent of horrified realization. "Very thoroughly," Webb confirmed. "We know how your species think, how your military doctrines function, how your political systems respond to various threats. We know because we've been carefully presenting you with scenarios designed to reveal those patterns." "But why?" This demanded, his scales shifting through multiple color patterns as he struggled to process the implications. "What is the purpose of this elaborate deception?" Elena and Webb exchanged glances across the communication link. This was the moment they had been building toward for decades. "Because," Elena said quietly, "the galaxy is about to face a threat that the Triumvirate's military doctrine cannot handle. And when that happens, you're going to need allies who understand war in ways you've never imagined." Webb nodded grimly. "The Void Hunter raids were never the real threat, gentlemen. They were practice sessions, preparing for something much worse." The Admiral activated one final display, showing long-range sensor data from the galactic rim. New contacts were appearing on the edge of known space, massive fleet formations moving with purpose toward inhabited systems. "The Devourers," Webb said simply. "The Void Hunters have been tracking them for 2 centuries, watching as they consumed entire civilizations in distant galaxies. They finally found us." The chamber fell completely silent as the alien representative stared at the sensor data, trying to comprehend the scope of the threat bearing down on them. "Estimated time of arrival," Webb continued relentlessly, "is 18 months. And everything you think you know about warfare is about to become completely useless." The revelation about the Devourers changed everything in the Defense Committee chamber. Elena watched as 3 of the galaxy's most powerful species processed information that would reshape their understanding of the universe itself. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before Vexthis found his voice. "You're saying that everything, the Void Hunter raids, the human military failures, decades of intelligence gathering, all of it was preparation for an invasion by an unknown enemy?" "Unknown to you," Admiral Webb corrected from the communication link. "The Void Hunters have been tracking the Devourers for over 2 centuries. They're a machine intelligence that consumes organic civilizations, processing entire populations into raw materials for their expanding fleets." Elena activated her personal display, showing the intelligence data that had been gathered through the Human Void Hunter partnership. The images were horrifying. Worlds stripped of all organic matter, leaving behind only geometric scars where cities had once stood. Space filled with massive mechanical constructs that defied conventional understanding of physics and engineering. "The Devourers operate on principles that make traditional military doctrine useless," Elena explained. "They don't have central command structures to target, no supply lines to cut, no political leadership to negotiate with. They simply arrive, analyze local defensive capabilities, and adapt their approach to overwhelm any resistance." Military resonance. Prime's crystalline form resonated with frequencies Elena had never heard before, suggesting emotional states that the consortium rarely displayed publicly. "How many civilizations have they consumed?" Webb's image on the display showed the grim expression of a military commander who had studied too many battlefield reports. 43 confirmed, with another dozen planetary systems completely sterilized. "They don't take prisoners, they don't occupy territory, and they don't leave survivors. When they're finished with a galaxy, there's nothing left but processed matter and empty space." Collective Node Military Analysis Prime interface unit had gone completely still, its bio-neural connections pulsing with the rapid data exchanges that indicated intensive communication with the broader collective consciousness. When it finally spoke, its voice carried overtones Elena had learned to recognize as barely controlled panic. This information must be verified. The collective requires direct sensory confirmation of these claims. Which brings us to today's demonstration, Webb replied. The Void Hunters have agreed to reveal their true military capabilities, not as enemies of the Triumvirate, but as potential allies against a threat that none of us can face alone. Elena called up the real-time tactical display, showing the current positions of Triumvirate fleets throughout the region. The aliens had committed massive resources to their planned encirclement of Void Hunter forces, confident that superior technology and overwhelming numbers would ensure victory. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral? Eleanor said formally. Are our partners ready to begin the demonstration? Confirmed, Webb replied. Commander Secton reports all elements in position. The exercise will commence in 60 seconds. Elena turned to address the alien representatives directly. What you're about to witness is not an attack on Triumvirate forces, it's a demonstration of unconventional warfare techniques that will be necessary to defeat the Devourers. I strongly recommend that your fleet commanders avoid taking hostile action during the exercise. Hostile action against what? Vexthus demanded, his scales shifting toward the deep red of battle readiness. Our sensors show the Void Hunter forces maintaining their defensive positions. Elena's smile was sharp and predatory. Your sensors are showing you exactly what the Void Hunters want them to show, just like they have been for the past 18 months. The tactical display updated, and suddenly the true scope of the Void Hunter presence became clear. What had appeared to be scattered raider groups hiding in asteroid fields and nebulae revealed itself as a massive, coordinated fleet that had been operating under complete sensor stealth for over a year. The numbers were staggering. Where Triumvirate intelligence had identified perhaps 36 Void Hunter vessels, the true count was closer to 3,000. And they weren't primitive raiders using crude technology. They were sophisticated warships employing stealth systems that made them effectively invisible to Triumvirate sensors. Impossible, Military Resonance Prime chimed, her crystalline form now resonating with pure disbelief. Our sensor networks would have detected fleet movements of this magnitude. Your sensor networks detected exactly what they were programmed to detect, Elena replied. The Void Hunters have had 60 years to study your technology and develop countermeasures. Every sensor array, every detection algorithm, every military protocol in your arsenal has been analyzed and circumvented. The demonstration began with a precision that took Elena's breath away, despite having seen it in simulation dozens of times. Void Hunter forces materialized from apparent empty space at predetermined coordinates throughout the region, their movements synchronized with clockwork precision. They weren't attacking Triumvirate positions. Instead, they were surrounding them with a tactical elegance that made traditional military doctrine look like the fumbling of children. Phase 1 complete, Webb reported. All Triumvirate fleet elements are now contained within predetermined engagement zones. Beginning Phase 2. The second phase showcased capabilities that violated everything the Triumvirate thought they knew about the laws of physics. Void Hunter vessels began moving in ways that defied conventional understanding of momentum and acceleration, executing maneuvers that should have torn their hulls apart under gravitational stress. They weren't using faster-than-light drives in any recognizable form. They were folding space around themselves, stepping across light years of distance as if the intervening void simply didn't exist. Elena watched the alien representative's reactions with professional interest. Vexthus had gone completely still, his scales locked in patterns that suggested his nervous system was overloaded with shock. Military resonance. Prime's harmonic frequencies had shifted into ranges that indicated her crystalline matrix was approaching structural failure from stress resonance. The collective's bio-interface unit was twitching with rapid neural activity that suggested the hive mind was struggling to process what it was observing.
How? Vexthus finally managed to whisper.
The Void Hunters developed their technology specifically to counter machine intelligences like the Devourers, Elena explained. Traditional warfare relies on predictable physical laws and established tactical doctrines. The Devourers analyze those patterns and develop countermeasures within minutes of first contact. But warfare that operates outside conventional physics, that uses tactics based on psychological manipulation and strategic deception, that's something machine intelligence has never learned to counter. Phase 3 initiating, Webb announced, demonstrating coordinated multi-species tactical integration. This was the part Elena had been looking forward to most. Green markers began appearing on the tactical display, as human forces revealed their true positions throughout the region. Like the Void Hunters, human ships had been operating under complete stealth, positioned with mathematical precision to complement their partners' movements. But the humans weren't using the same exotic technologies as their allies. Instead, they were demonstrating something that struck at the very heart of triumvirate military philosophy: the power of appearing to be something other than what you really were. Human vessels that had seemed to be simple cargo transports suddenly revealed themselves as sophisticated military platforms. Mining ships deployed weapon systems that outclassed anything in the triumvirate arsenal. Research vessels began coordinating with Void Hunter forces using communication protocols that operated faster than light without any detectable transmission medium. For 60 years, Elena said quietly, humanity has been developing military technologies while maintaining the fiction that we were barely capable of hitting our intended targets. Every failed operation was actually a field test of equipment and tactics that the triumvirate never suspected existed. The coordinated demonstration reached its climax as human and Void Hunter forces executed a joint maneuver that would have been impossible using conventional military doctrine. They weren't destroying the triumvirate fleets that had come to encircle them. Instead, they were demonstrating that those fleets could be neutralized, contained, and controlled without firing a single shot. Every triumvirate vessel in the region found itself surrounded by enemies that had materialized from empty space, cut off from reinforcements by forces that could move faster than their weapons could track, and facing weapons systems that operated on principles their shields and armor were never designed to counter. "This is what we've been aiming at," Elena announced to the stunned alien representatives. "Not your ships, not your territories, not your political systems. We've been aiming at the moment when you would finally understand that the old ways of warfare are about to become extinct." The tactical display showed the final phase of the demonstration as human and Void Hunter forces began withdrawing to their original positions. The triumvirate fleets they left behind were completely unharmed but had been utterly outmaneuvered by an enemy they had never seen coming. "The Devourers won't be as gentle," Admiral Webb said grimly. "When they arrive, they'll use every weakness we've just demonstrated to destroy your fleets within hours of first contact. Traditional military doctrine won't just be ineffective against them, it will be actively counterproductive." Elena deactivated the tactical displays and faced the alien representatives directly. "The choice is yours. You can continue to believe that superior technology and overwhelming force will always prevail, in which case you'll share the fate of the 43 civilizations that came before you. Or you can accept that the galaxy has changed, and that survival will require new approaches to warfare that none of us can develop alone." The chamber fell silent again as the three species processed the implications of what they had just witnessed. Elena could see the calculations running behind their eyes as they began to understand the true scope of the threat they faced. "What do you want from us?" Vexthis finally asked, his voice carrying none of its earlier condescension. Elena's smile was genuine this time, without the sharp edge of hidden knowledge that had characterized her expression throughout the crisis. "We want partners, real ones. The kind who understand that sometimes the most effective strategy is to miss your target on purpose while aiming at something much more important. The Devourers will be here in 18 months, Admiral Webb added. "We have that long to transform 3 separate military doctrines into something that can fight as a unified force against an enemy that has never lost a battle." Elena looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives from 3 species that had spent centuries believing they were the apex predators of galactic civilization. "The question is whether you're ready to learn what humans and Void Hunters discovered decades ago, that the most powerful weapon in any war is the ability to make your enemies underestimate you until the moment you reveal what you've really been capable of all along." The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet that had dominated the chamber earlier. This was the silence of minds recalibrating, of assumptions being discarded, of species that had believed they understood the universe, realizing they had been looking at shadows on the wall while the real game was being played somewhere else entirely. When Vexthis spoke again, his voice carried a note of something Elena had never heard from a triumvirate representative before. "Respect. Show us," he said simply. "Show us how to fight like humans." 18 months later, Elena Vasquez stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Galactic Defense Station, watching as the most unusual fleet in the history of known space prepared for battle. The sight would have been incomprehensible to anyone who had witnessed the traditional triumvirate military exercises of the past, drawn with the rigid formations and overwhelming displays of firepower that had characterized alien military doctrine for centuries. Instead, the void around the station swarmed with an organic-looking pattern of ships that seemed to move with the fluid grace of a hunting pack. Zephyrian vessels flowed through space in configurations that their own military academies had once declared impossible, their pilots having learned to think in three-dimensional spirals rather than linear attack vectors. Crystalline consortium ships resonated with frequencies that created standing wave patterns across vast distances, turning empty space itself into a communication medium that could coordinate fleet movements faster than light. Collective bioships moved in swarm formations that made them appear to be a single vast organism rather than individual vessels. And weaving through it all, barely visible even to Elena's enhanced senses, were the human and Void Hunter vessels that had taught them all how to fight like ghosts. Final preparations are complete, Admiral Webb reported from his position on the bridge of the UES Hawking. All fleet elements report ready for Operation Final Strike. Elena nodded, though she knew Webb couldn't see the gesture through their audio-only communication link. The combined fleet that had assembled here represented the greatest cooperative military effort in galactic history, but it was also something far more significant. It was proof that four very different species could abandon their fundamental assumptions about warfare and learn to think in entirely new ways. The transformation hadn't been easy. Those 18 months had seen more military doctrine discarded and rewritten than in the previous 5 centuries combined. Traditional triumvirate officers had struggled to accept tactics that seemed to violate basic physics, while human and Void Hunter commanders had worked to translate concepts that had never been designed for species that thought in terms of overwhelming technological superiority. But they had succeeded beyond Elena's most optimistic projections. The fleet preparing for battle wasn't just a combination of different military traditions. It was something genuinely new, a hybrid approach to warfare that utilized the best insights from 4 different evolutionary paths. Long-range sensors confirmed Devourer fleet composition, called out Commander Park from the census station. 123 primary vessels, approximately 1,500 support craft, and what appears to be a mobile processing facility the size of a small moon. Elena felt a chill run down her spine despite having seen the intelligence reports dozens of times. The Devourer fleet approaching their position was larger than anything they had prepared for during their training exercises. But then, that was exactly what Admiral Webb and Commander Secton had warned them to expect. Remember, Webb's voice carried clearly across the command frequencies, the Devourers don't just bring overwhelming force. They bring the accumulated military knowledge of every civilization they've ever consumed. They'll adapt to our tactics within minutes of first contact, which means our only advantage is fighting in ways they've never encountered before. Elena activated the primary communication array, broadcasting to the entire combined fleet. This was the moment she had been preparing for since that day in the whole of galactic heritage, when she had first seen the Triumvirate's casual dismissal of human military capabilities. All units, this is Ambassador Vasquez, she began, her voice carrying across 4 different species' communication protocols simultaneously. Today, we face an enemy that has never known defeat. They have consumed 43 civilizations by studying their military doctrines and developing perfect countermeasures. But there's something the Devourers have never encountered before. She paused, looking out at the impossible ballet of ships moving through space around the station. They've never faced a civilization that built its military doctrine around the principle of deliberate misdirection. They've never fought an enemy that spent decades appearing to be something other than what it really was. And they've certainly never encountered a species that learned to fight by teaching others to underestimate them. The tactical displays around the observation deck lit up with data as the Devourer fleet entered the sensor perimeter. Elena watched as the alien machines moved with the mechanical precision that had destroyed so many civilizations before them. Their formations optimized for maximum efficiency and firepower. Phase 1 initiating, Webb announced. All triumvirate elements execute traditional engagement patterns. Elena smiled grimly as she watched the first part of their strategy unfold. To outside observers, it would appear that the combined fleet was falling back on conventional military doctrine, meeting the Devourers with the kind of head-on engagement that had failed 43 times before. Zephyrian vessels moved into traditional attack formations. Consortium ships powered up their main weapons arrays, and collective bioships swarmed forward in patterns that had been standard for centuries. The Devourers responded exactly as predicted, analyzing the incoming tactics and deploying countermeasures that had proven effective against every other civilization they had encountered. Their weapon systems reconfigured to optimal frequencies for penetrating consortium crystalline hulls. Their defensive patterns adapted to neutralize collective swarm tactics. Their movement algorithms predicted and countered every aspect of traditional Zephyrian fleet coordination. Within minutes, the first phase of the battle had devolved into exactly the kind of grinding technological superiority contest that the Devourers had never lost. Triumvirate vessels began taking heavy casualties as machine intelligence proved superior to organic tactical thinking in every measurable category. But Alina wasn't watching the main battle. Her attention was focused on the secondary displays that showed what the Devourers couldn't detect: the positions of human and Void Hunter vessels that had never appeared on the enemy's sensors. Phase 2 initiating, Webb announced. All ghost elements. Begin psychological warfare protocols. This was the part of the plan that had taken the most time to develop, requiring human psychologists to work with Void Hunter behavioral specialists to understand how machine intelligence processed unexpected data. The Devourers were perfect analytical engines, capable of developing countermeasures for any tactic they could observe and categorize. But they had never learned to deal with tactics that deliberately made no sense. Human vessels that had been hiding in the sensor shadows of asteroids suddenly appeared throughout the battle zone, not attacking Devourer positions, but instead targeting what appeared to be empty space. Their weapons fired at coordinates that contained nothing, missing everything important, while hitting targets that served no apparent strategic purpose. To the Devourers, this looked like the kind of military incompetence that had made humans the laughingstock of the galaxy for decades. The machine intelligence allocated minimal resources to tracking human positions, categorizing them as a negligible threat based on their apparent inability to hit anything that mattered, which was exactly what the humans had been counting on. Void Hunter elements execute reality displacement, Webb called out. Elena held her breath as the most exotic aspect of their battle plan began to unfold. Void Hunter vessels throughout the battle zone activated technology that the Triumvirate scientists still didn't fully understand, creating localized distortions in space-time itself. The empty coordinates that human forces had been targeting suddenly weren't empty anymore. Matter that had been displaced into pocket dimensions snapped back into normal space, materializing inside Devourer formations with devastating effect. Weapons platforms that had been hidden in folded space deployed at point-blank range from enemy vessels. Most importantly, the mobile processing facility that represented the Devourer's central coordination hub found itself surrounded by human-built gravity mines that had been placed in its exact location 3 days earlier. Target acquired, Elena announced with satisfaction. This is what we've been aiming at from the beginning. The Devourer's perfect analytical capabilities became their weakness as they struggled to process what had just happened. How could enemy forces attack positions they had never occupied? How could weapons appear inside formations that were protected by impenetrable shields? How could an entire battle plan be based on missing targets that somehow turned out to be exactly the right targets after all? For the first time in their recorded history, the Devourers faced a tactical situation that their accumulated knowledge couldn't explain. Phase 3, Webb announced. All units demonstrate what we've learned from each other. The final phase of the battle showcased what had taken 18 months to perfect. 4 different species fighting as a unified force while using tactics that none of them could have developed alone. Zephyrian vessels moved in patterns inspired by Void Hunter dimensional manipulation, executing maneuvers that looked impossible to enemy sensors. Consortium ships used harmonic resonance techniques learned from human psychological warfare specialists, creating communication networks that confused machine attempts at signal interception. Collective swarms adapted human misdirection principles, making their true objectives completely unpredictable. And through it all, human and Void Hunter vessels continued to miss targets with precision that would have been embarrassing if anyone had failed to understand the purpose behind their apparent incompetence. Elena watched as the Devourer fleet, for the first time in their history, began to falter. Their perfect analytical capabilities had become a liability when faced with enemies that fought using principles that couldn't be analyzed, categorized, or countered through conventional logic. Central Processing Facility is taking critical damage, Commander Park reported. Enemy coordination protocols are failing across all ship classes. Confirmed, Elena replied, though she kept her voice professionally neutral, despite the surge of triumph she felt. All units, begin final phase. Show them what happens when you stop missing on purpose. And the coup de grace came from an unexpected source. Thomas Chen, now commanding his own vessel after 18 months of intensive training, led a squadron of human ships in what appeared to be one final display of targeting incompetence. His ships fired at seemingly random coordinates throughout the Devourer formation, their shots going wide by margins that would have been comical in any other context, except that each missed shot was actually precisely targeted at quantum resonance points that Void Hunter scientists had identified in Devourer hull composition. When all the shots reached their real targets simultaneously, the entire enemy fleet found itself subject to a cascade failure that turned their own armor into a weapon against them. The Devourers, who had never experienced defeat, tried to retreat, but they discovered that the empty space around them was no longer empty. Void Hunter vessels materialized from dimensional folds that had been prepared hours earlier, while human ships revealed themselves from sensor shadows that had hidden their true positions throughout the entire battle. "Admiral Webb," Elena said formally, "you may inform the Devourers that they are surrounded by forces that have been planning this engagement for over 60 years. If they wish to discuss terms for surrender, we are prepared to demonstrate that humans have finally learned to hit exactly what we're aiming at." The response came not from the Devourer fleet, but from their central processing facility. It was the first time in recorded galactic history that the machine intelligence had ever attempted direct communication with a species they considered prey. Query: how did organic entities develop tactics that exceed optimal analytical parameters? Elena's smile was visible from every ship in the fleet as she responded. "Simple," she said. "We learned that the most effective way to hit your target is to spend decades convincing everyone else that you can't aim at all. While you were studying our failures, we were studying you. While you were developing countermeasures for conventional warfare, we were developing warfare that operates outside conventional understanding." There was a long pause before the Devourer response came. "Terms for cessation of hostilities?" Admiral Webb took over the communication channel. "Complete withdrawal from this galaxy, permanent cessation of organic harvesting activities, and cooperation in developing defensive protocols for other civilizations that haven't yet learned to fight the way we do. Acceptable. Organic entities demonstrate superior strategic evolution." As the Devourer fleet began powering down their weapons systems in preparation for withdrawal, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The galaxy would remember this day not as the moment when superior firepower won another battle, but as the day when 4 different species proved that the most powerful weapon in any war was the willingness to let your enemies underestimate you while you aimed at something they never saw coming. "Ambassador," Webb's voice came through the communication link with what she could swear was amusement, "would you care to update the Hall of Galactic Heritage with some new exhibits?" Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the combined fleet's communication channels. "I think they're going to need a much larger hall. After today, the galaxy is going to want to study human accuracy very carefully indeed." In the years that followed, historians would mark this battle as the moment when galactic civilization evolved beyond traditional concepts of warfare. The Triumvirate Defense Council became the Galactic Unity Command, with representatives from all 4 species sharing leadership responsibilities. The old hierarchies based on technological superiority gave way to new alliances built on mutual respect and complementary capabilities. But Elena knew that the most important victory wasn't military or political, it was psychological. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the best way to prove your competence was to spend decades convincing everyone else that you were incompetent, while working toward goals they never suspected. And when humanity finally revealed what they had really been aiming at all along, no one would ever underestimate human accuracy again. The age of human diplomatic embarrassment was over. The age of human strategic dominance had begun.